You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford,
Corey Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mock,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is... Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm super excited to have Sharon Cooper on the show with me. She has a brand new release. The book, as we're recording this on Thursday, and the book came out on Tuesday, I believe it was, In It to Win It. What a fun book. I know you're all going to love it. I really enjoyed it. And, as we're approaching the end of the year, what a great, happy, feel-good story to kind of cap off the end of the year. I know you're going to love it. We'll put links in the show notes where you can grab it. Welcome to the show, Sharon.
Thank you, Hank. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Sharon, I like to begin the show with a fun question to kind of set the tone and to get things started. And that question that we've started 1,200 episodes or better with is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Alrighty. My first memory. Wow, that's a good question. I think my first memory was my family had a child care center that I used to run many years ago. And I remember a conversation with one of the kids. And I think I was telling him, I did the administrative work. And I asked him if he washed his hands. I can't remember what he said, but it gave me a book idea. So I wrote a kid's book entitled, But I Washed My Hands Yesterday. And I think that conversation with it, I think it was like 3 or 4, with him kind of gave me the idea I should write a book on kids or about kids or for kids. And yeah. So the book never got published, but I turned it into a play and it got picked up like a week after I sent it out. Yeah.
That's fun. A lot of folks have a similar story of having an idea and writing that idea. And for the vast majority of people that I've talked to, that first book doesn't get published and never sees the light of day. That the fact that yours got turned into a play is amazing. But there is something to be said for having an idea and seeing that idea all the way through to a finished product. And then whether that thing goes on to find an audience or not, there's something that happens inside you when you realize that this is something that you can complete and that a whole story can come out of you. That's an empowering feeling, isn't it?
It really is. It really is. Though I didn't pursue writing children's book, it really did kind of get me started as far as forcing me to do a little research on what's involved in getting published. And it was years later before I actually decided to write a romance novel. But that probably was the part that really, probably was the time it really got me to thinking about writing.
I love that so much. So what was the catalyst? You said it was years later when you wrote your first romance. What was the thing that motivated you to do that?
I was reading more, and the majority of the books I was reading were romance novels. And I don't remember, at any, if I was reading a particular book that made me think like, I should try writing this. But I do know that idea popped in my head after reading hundreds of romance novels and enjoying them. And it's like, maybe I should try to write a romance. And, many years later, I actually published. I started with indie publishing.
Yeah. I asked my friend Beverly Jenkins this question a few months ago when we were talking, and um, I'm of the opinion that no matter what genre you write, that reading romance is good for you. There's
Oh yeah,
there's there's
definitely.
good. You can learn so much from building characters and character motivation and all of the things that are wrapped up in that from great romance authors. And I asked Beverly what what's so important about romance, and she had a very particular answer for why romance is so important. But what is it about the genre that you love so much and that you think makes romance such a versatile place to write?
Wow, that's another good question. For me, I think the biggest draw is the happily ever after. Where you're guaranteed to end the story with you know, a happily ever after.
Yeah.
That is probably the biggest draw for me. And I love seeing people in love. So watching a character's journey into finding love is always appealing. Yeah. So I would have to say for me, it's probably the guaranteed happily ever after.
Does that ever feel constraining to you? Because I know that you have written romantic suspense as well as more modern romance or whatever contemporary romance I
Yeah.
think is the preferred title for the genre these days.
Yeah.
But even when writing romantic suspense, is the promise of a happily ever after, is that always kind of hanging out there through the writing?
Um, I would have to say yes. That's always my end goal when I'm plotting a story is what do I have to do to get these two together to guarantee they're happily ever after?
Gotcha. What was that first romance book that you wrote? Did you publish that first romance book that you wrote?
I did. I
Yeah.
did. It took years, and there's no way I would go back and read it because it probably would take more years to to make it right. Interesting enough, it still sells. But my very first romance um, is entitled "Something New," and that book has a little bit of everything, a little bit of suspense. It probably would be considered an edgy, sweet romance. And so that was before I knew pretty much anything. The story is well written, but it took years to get it to that point because I was just kind of still learning, still learning the genre, still learning everything basically.
It's so funny that you say that you haven't gone back and read that story yet, and it would, I think for most of us, if not all of us, going back and reading that early work is, can be a cringeworthy experience. You're like, oh, I've learned so much since then. But that's one of the beauties of publishing is that once you finish that book and put it out there, it's out there.
That's
And
it.
all you can do is move forward, and
Exactly.
it's funny that you can go back and you can look and you can see kind of the journey that you've gone on from
Yeah.
there. And oh wow, I've learned so much, I've grown so much. But it's funny to look back and see, I can see the roots of where I was then. I'm
Yes.
still the same person, even if the craft has gotten a little better, or maybe I understand the genre a little more, or
Yeah.
understand the business a
Right.
little more.
Right.
It's so funny to look back and see that you're still the same storyteller you were then, even if you've grown a little bit.
I agree. That story really, even though I'd be afraid to go back and reread it, that particular story is how I got my first traditional contract.
Mm.
There was an editor from Harlequin who said she was looking through Barnes and Noble and ran across the story and enjoyed it and reached out to me to see if I'd ever considered writing traditionally. So though that story took forever to kind of get out there and probably, have more cringeworthy aspects to it, it definitely really kicked off my my writing career, I guess. As far as traditionally and indie, so
Yeah.
I have fond memories of that story.
I'm so glad you brought up that first book was indie published because, over the last decade, probably a little more than a decade now, ever since the Amazon Kindle came out, and then, the whole ecosystem grew up around the Kindle for KDP and, self-publishing and really legitimized self-publishing in a lot of people's eyes, and, gave authors another avenue for publication. But now you are traditionally published. How do you view kind of the publishing landscape now, the indie versus the traditional, and is in your mind, is one always the right choice, or is it just adding more tools in the writer's toolkit?
Wow, that's a good question. I definitely don't believe, one choice fits all.
Sure.
I have many author friends who are only traditionally published, many who are only indie published, and a huge amount who are both.
Yeah.
And I think I can't speak for them, but I definitely, am one to believe that as a writer or author, I think, I love the idea of having choices. Whether you want to go the traditional route, indie route, or hybrid, like I am. I'm rambling. I mean, I probably losing sight of the initial question. Forgive me for that.
No, you're fine.
My brain goes, kind of faster than my mouth, I think. But if I remember your question correctly, I love the idea of there being choices. From what I understand, many years ago, many authors only had the traditional
Right.
route, and so many hearts were broken when their books couldn't get published.
Right.
And so I think when indie came along, I love the opportunity to publish books independently came along, because for many of us who I love indie, basically I love indie publishing. With doing traditional and indie, I realized I'm kind of a control freak, which I never knew that until I did a few contracts with traditional publishers and realized I didn't have a lot of control.
Right.
So for those of us who are control freaks, it's nice to have the indie option where you just write the story that's in your heart or in your mind and just run with it.
And when you publish on the indie side, when you get to have your hands on every part of the process, from the writing to the editing to the determining your covers to your marketing, it's easy to become a control freak because it's your responsibility now.
That's right. Yeah, so it's not my fault I became a control freak.
No, not at all. Not at all. It's you were thrust into it.
Exactly. I never thought about it like that, but I'm using that.
There you go. After that first book that you published, you went on to write a number of series, from the Jenkins Family series to the Atlanta series, to the Reunited series, the Atlanta's Finest series, excuse me. How do you feel about writing standalone books versus series? Because you're your newest book, and I think your last couple of books have been back to standalones.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the difference in approaching a project, knowing this is a brand new a brand new canvas that you get to put this story on, and maybe you'll never visit that again, versus coming back to familiar characters and familiar settings and familiar dynamics, when you're writing a long running series?
Yeah, I have to say I love familiar. I really enjoy writing series because the characters from one book to the next really do just become a part of you. It's like I know them. So I really enjoy that part. And I really like the idea because I know some authors, when they do series, they have their two main characters are the main characters for every book in the series, where mine's every book in the series has different main characters. But I bring in some of the old characters because they have fans out there. And so I really enjoy writing series. With the standalone, I enjoy those because it forces me not to get too comfortable. Um, there's, I, I feel like I took a different approach with the standalones. With the romantic comedy, with the second book, though it's not technically part of a series, it does one of the main characters, the heroine, um, is from my previous romantic comedy. She was first introduced in Business Not as Usual. And so there still was a little bit of familiar. Well, yeah, I guess I still was a little familiar with her, but because it technically wasn't a series, it did feel like she was still new to me, if that makes any sense.
That does make sense. That does make sense. Sharon, one of my favorite things to ask authors is because I love to see how writers' brains work. And if we're talking about a book like In It to Win It, your new book that's out, available everywhere now, at one moment in time, nothing about this book existed. It just didn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
Then maybe you start playing the what if game.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you read something that kind of triggered your creative thoughts. Maybe you watched a news story on TV or something, and then all of a sudden, you start casting characters in your mind, and they walk onto the stage of your brain, and then when something happens, then In It to Win It does exist, and then it's your job as the writer to kind of dig that story out and polish it up, and then you've got a thing to present to the world. What is that first moment of inspiration when you're thinking about a new book? What is that first moment of inspiration for you?
I think for me, which is probably unusual, but whenever I'm even entertaining the idea of a new book, it usually starts with the two main characters just kind of, tossing ideas around who they might be and their career. For some reason, usually my stories are built around their personalities and their career, because careers are such a big part of our lives.
Sure.
That's usually how I build my plots. Once I kind of know just a little, I don't even have to know a whole lot about the characters. But if I know a little about their personality and their career, I just run with it. It all just kind of comes together with those aspects first.
So is there an aspect of creating this character or these characters and then throwing them in a room and seeing what happens?
Kinda. I usually start with a character sketch for the two main characters. And as I'm just making up things in that character sketch, it just kind of builds from there. And I usually try, for the most part, is doing opposites. Like in It to Win It, Morgan, the heroine, she she is from a very wealthy family. Her dad is an A-list actor. She has never wanted for anything. The youngest of three children, just kind of was able to kind of skate through life, do whatever she want without much responsibility. Whereas the hero, his family was not wealthy. They were comfortable, but his parents died when he was 18, and he was left with the responsibility of raising his two siblings, who were twins, 2-year-old twins at the time. And so it was my what ifs were like, what if I put them together? What would be some of their conflicts? Besides, you had Morgan, who's laid back, easygoing, just kind of fly by the seat of her pants kind of person. And Drake, the hero, is very serious, very A-type, has planned out his whole future and the twins' future. And very serious. He had to work for his millionaire status where Morgan was born into it. So, right there, I have several different conflicts where I could go so many different ways with the stories. And that's usually how I build. Forgive me if I'm not answering the question.
No, you're perfect.
Yeah. And that's usually how I build the stories that kind of start with those particular aspects. But in that, their career is important for me because I know, a career for some people, some feel like that's who they are. So I kind of, go from there.
As writers, we love to put people in one of two camps, the plotter camp, or the fly by the seat of your pants or pantser camp. Do you fit firmly into one of those two camps, or are you an amalgamation?
Very firmly in the plotting camp. I tried being a pantser once, and I thought I was going to lose my mind. It was horrible. It was like a nightmare. I was like, I don't know how people do this, And then after wasting weeks of getting nowhere, I went back to plotting.
So do you, how much pre-writing do you do before you start drafting the novel? Are you one of these people that writes out a 20-page outline, or, do you just kind of have sketches of where the story needs to go? What does an outline look like for you?
For me, I am that 20-page outline person, where
Gotcha.
usually I go chapter by chapter, and I usually do the scene and sequel. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that.
Yeah.
I do it my own way, though. So my outline will include a goal, conflict, and then a disaster for that particular chapter. And then I have bullet points of things that need to happen or that I want to happen in that chapter. I work in the sequel part of it, a little bit, but I definitely always have those first three in mind for every single chapter in my outline. I will say, though, my outline, once I'm really deep into the story, it often changes. Sometimes to the point where I don't even recognize, the story compared to what I've outlined, where I've taken weeks to outline. Sometimes the story doesn't necessarily end up the way I, wrote it, but it really does help me just kind of fly through, a big chunk of the story with having an initial detailed outline.
Gotcha. Sharon, you said earlier that one of the things that motivates you when thinking about a new story is the occupation of your protagonist, and then what that will mean for their personalities and their motivations and that sort of thing. In your new book, In It to Win It, we've got a pair of characters that are both entrepreneurs, and we've got a real estate deal that's thrown into the mix. What was your thinking in developing this story, and what do you think that two people that are entrepreneurial Try saying that 3 times real fast.
I know, right?
Mine did, even though they're coming from vastly different backgrounds, but their motivations are the same in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But because of their backgrounds, maybe there's some other motivations there. What was your idea for dreaming up this scenario?
Yeah, I'm trying to think how I even got to that point. I'm always fascinated with real estate, and I was a construction worker for 10 years many years ago. And so, real estate is me. I enjoy, throwing at any kind of story. But in this case, Morgan, she technically doesn't have to work. She doesn't have to do anything for that matter because financially she's secure. But because she wants to make a name for herself, she decides that she has to try different businesses, in order to do that, not just kind of ride on the coattail of her parents who are very well off or use her trust fund or anything like that. And so over the years, she has tried numerous businesses, some very, ridiculous business like a cuddling service, things of that nature. So she, as an entrepreneur, she's not as serious as Drake became an entrepreneur and, had to work for everything he got because he had to. He had, a great deal of responsibility at an early age. And so that's where their difference, they could both have that entrepreneurial spirit, but they kind of fell into it in different ways where he was, I won't say forced into it, but to get, to build the life that he needed to build or wanted to build for him and his siblings. This was the best route for him is, to become an entrepreneur. And where Morgan became an entrepreneur because she wanted to make a name for herself despite her well-known family.
And I love that contrast that they both want similar things, but for completely different reasons in a lot of ways. That Morgan is, she's wanting to kind of shed the entitled child kind of label and make it on her own. And then Drake, it almost feels like that he needs the success because he's got skin in the game. This is this is a livelihood situation. And those two different motivations are what really bring this story to life for me.
That's great to hear. Yeah, and that it really did make it easy to go through the story too, because I could totally see both sides of it. I could see her need to be more than just the spoiled little rich girl, so to speak, and then his need to build, eventually build an empire for him and his siblings and any family he might have, after.
Right. It's so funny because to see their motivations from where they are, because if Drake is successful and builds this empire, like you just said, that when he has children, those children will be in the same place that Morgan is,
Yeah, exactly.
It's so funny to see the cycle and how, one generation, removed, the problems all kind of perpetuate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or the blessings, perpetuate, however you want to look at it. It's so funny. This book is so much fun. And you mentioned earlier writing romantic comedy. You've written more serious romance in the past, even some suspenseful romance. What is it about writing with comedy in mind? And not that it's just slapstick humor, every other page, but there's a certain levity to it. There's a certain hopefulness is one word that comes to mind. A certain I don't know. It just feels lighthearted and feels, like a joyous,
Yeah.
occasion. In your mind, what is the difference in approaching those different genres or those different tones, if you will?
Yeah, my favorite genre to read and write is romantic suspense. I love, where you have the romance and so many other elements with it,
Yeah.
just to make a very full story. With the romantic comedy, I have to say that In It to Win It is probably the cutest story. I'm not a real cutesy kind of writer, but this story it was, even while writing, I'm thinking like, this is awfully cute. It's cute, it's fun. And, the stories, like over the last couple of years, when writing this was at least a year ago. It was, we're just kind of coming out of the pandemic, and, you kind of needed something to just kind of take your mind off of all of, because everybody went through different, life altering, in some cases, things during the last couple of years of this pandemic. And so while writing it, it's like I really wanted something that was just light and fun, something that offered a few chuckles and still get to that happily ever after. Yeah. Yeah. But I don't know if I'll write too many more romantic comedies. One, they're not that easy to write because I realize
the easier it is to read, the harder it is to write.
I think so.
Yeah.
Because, with humor, it's so subjective.
Yeah.
What's funny to me might not be funny to somebody else, and so it's such it's a little challenging. It's definitely a little challenging. Like I said, it's such a fun story, a feel-good story.
Absolutely.
But yeah,
Absolutely.
like, would this even be funny to somebody else as I'm typing and laughing, yeah, so.
So Sharon, if we know anything about the publishing business, this book that's out this week now has probably been off of your desk for months and months.
Oh,
and you probably wrapped this book up earlier this year, if not, sooner. But
few books does this one.
yeah, I can imagine. Which begs the question: what are you working on now?
Right now, I get tons of emails regarding my Jenkins family. I even received a couple, which I just think is hilarious, where readers have said they feel like they're cousins, to these Jenkins family. They really could relate to some of the scenario. Anyway, so because of that, I'm working on a Jenkins family reunion book. Some of the most popular characters will their fans will be able to catch up with what's going on in their lives.
I love it.
So that's what I'm working on now. It's a Jenkins family.
We can't wait to see what you come up with next. In It to Win It is available everywhere now. You can grab it in Kindle edition or paperback if you want to hold the physical book in your hands, or audiobook. It's also available in an Audible audio format. Any way that you like to consume books, it's available. We'll put links to all those places in the show notes to make it easy for folks to find you. Sharon, if people are just discovering you and want to dig into all the great stuff that you're up to, is there a place online where they can connect with you and follow along your publishing journey?
Yes. I think they can find everything about me as far as my writing on my website at sharoncooper.net. That'll have links to all my social media. It will have coming soon information, how people can sign up for my newsletter. They can find out everything through my website at sharoncooper.net.
Excellent. And I just clicked on your coming soon and I see A Love So Strong, a Jenkins family reunion. Yeah. Is that the book you were alluding to just a minute ago? Excellent. And that's dropping in February. That's just around the corner.
Coming up soon.
Coming up soon. Well, great. Well, Sharon, this has been so much fun chatting. We wish you continued success in publishing, and we're going to send everyone to visit you over at SharonCooper.net.
Hank, thanks so much for this opportunity. It's been fun.